Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing Hades, the action RPG roguelike game where your goal is to escape from the depths of hell and ascend to your rightful place among the gods of Olympus.
So the first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Hades is currently in full release and available both on PC and Switch for $25.
So Hades is what you would call a stereotypical roguelike game. But let me tell you right now that this game has something really special to offer. So hang with us as we dive into Hades and talk about what exactly is the game.
Hades has a ton of interesting elements to it and delivers on most of them near flawlessly. But let's start off by talking about its combat system, as that is the main draw for most players, and it is what the whole game hinges around. Hades combat is the definition of saying easy to learn but hard to master. It revolves around just a few simple controls: a dash, a basic attack, a special attack, a cast, and finally a calling of the gods. Now, while we don't have time to go over each of these in depth, I'd like to talk about the weapons in the game, as each one of them uses a combination of these abilities in order to enhance and make each of their gameplays unique. The first one you will get access to is the sword. This is exactly what you think it is. It is a close range, high DPS weapon, but comes with an added trick of being able to do a large AoE knockback with its special. The second one you get access to is the spear. The spear was one of my favorites, as it gave you everything the sword did, but also added in significantly longer range. The third weapon you gain access to is the shield. This is the only weapon in the game with the special ability to block incoming damage. This makes it a great weapon for when you're learning and trying to master how to defeat each of the game's bosses. The fourth is the bow, which does an extremely high amount of burst damage, but at the cost of a very slow fire rate and charge up time. The fifth is your fists. Yes, literally you're just gonna get to use your fists here. I think this weapon has the highest possible damage output, but requires you to be up close and personal with your foes in order to put it out. Finally, we have the gun. The gun is literally just a machine gun, which seemed quite silly to me in the game, since the whole game is based around the premise of being in the underworld or hell or whatever you want to call it. But it was actually really fun, and the characters in the game even go as far to crack jokes about it and how if it existed when they were still alive, it would have ended their days much faster. In the end though, each weapon in the game adds a unique gameplay style while also having a great balance to it at the same time.
Next, let's move on and talk shortly about the story. Don't worry, as always, no major spoilers here, but if you are interested in keeping the story fresh, then you can skip ahead to the time on the screen. Hades' story is quite simplistic, but has plenty of twists and turns in order to keep you interested along the way. You play as Hades' son, and your goal is to escape from hell and join the other gods on Mount Olympus. And to be honest, who can blame you? I mean, who wants to live in hell when Olympus is an option? You'll even meet tons of side characters who you don't have to talk to, but really help grow and develop the story as you go through. The best part is, for such a small game, you might expect their dialogue to be boring and not fun, but in Hades, they each have their own story and even voiced dialogue. The characters are always cracking jokes, and every time you see them, they always have something interesting and new to say. This was one of the most refreshing things about Hades, and in a game priced as low as it is, I certainly was not expecting it. So let's talk about the progression. Hades has an amazing and fabulous progression system, both at the beginning and end of the game. At the start, you are tasked with mostly just unlocking things you didn't have before, and this starts off with weapons, but quickly progresses to trinkets that gives you small buffs, and even leveling up those trinkets. Shortly after that, you will get to the main part of the progression, which is the mirror. Essentially, this is just a way to upgrade your character between runs with a resource collected by doing runs. It's nothing too crazy, but if every time you do a run you hit 5% harder, then hey.
That's a lot of damage!
By the time you hit the end game, you probably have already unlocked and upgraded most of these things as far as you can go, right? Well, nope. The game goes a step further and lets you upgrade your weapons, the mirror, and trinkets even further. This creates a great reason for you to want to keep playing the game and trying to get stronger and stronger. But wait, what's the point in getting stronger if the enemies stay the same? Well, that's where the heat system comes in. Hades introduces what I can most closely describe to you as the skull system from Halo games. These are a way to turn up the difficulty but get more rewards in return. The game already feels hard without these, but then becomes on a complete and utter new level once you have it on.
Since we are on the topic of difficulty, let's talk about bosses for a moment. The bosses in this game are pretty awesome. Each boss appears in the same order for every run. However, the bosses each have a few different variations that add new mechanics and visuals to their encounters. This keeps the game feeling fresh, and I believe I ran into 3 different versions of most of the bosses, excluding the final one. He was already hard enough. Each boss also recognizes you each time you meet, which, without spoiling anything, we'll just say makes for some interesting and new dialogue every run. The bosses each also have patterns which make it feel like every time you fight them, they get a little easier because you've learned their attack patterns and tells.
So now let's move on to the pros for the game. First off, we have that there was a superb art style with this game. The graphics were really refreshing and made it feel new every time you did another run. Next, we have that the story and dialogue in this game were just absolutely amazing. Every single character was voice acted, which really helped build that connection between the player and the NPCs. After that, we have that the progression system in the game was really satisfying. And what I mean by that is that every time you played, whether you beat the first boss, the last boss, or anything in between, you always gain some progress on your character. And finally for the pros, we have that the combat just felt good. I mean, in the beginning it was easy to learn and pick up, but by the time you got into the late game, it really felt good because you were able to master everything. Every time you fought a boss, you learned something new, which made you feel more powerful and stronger and more skilled every single time you did it.
So now let's move on to the cons for the game. The only thing worth mentioning in the cons section for this game was the fact that once you beat the final boss, the grind becomes a bit stale and it becomes a repeat of the same content with slightly harder difficulty. Now, we understand this is the concept in many roguelike games, but we just felt that others do it a little better than Hades did. So this brings us to the final rating for the game. And when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment for every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, with Hades, we would want to get 25 hours of enjoyment out of the $25 that we spent on the game. So after putting 24 played hours into this game, we give it 9 out of 10 potatoes.
Yeah, I mean, this game will be enjoyed by gamers for years to come. There's just so much to like about this game. The only reason we didn't give it a perfect rating on whether or not it was worth the cost was because in the end game, it began to feel like a greater rift grind in Diablo, which to us was a bit less satisfying given that the game is strictly single player only. We have no doubt that you will get your 25 hours worth from this game. That is, if you decide to buy it, of course. But just know that you may not get hundreds of hours unless you just live for that grind.
Now, if you want more money-saving content, consider subscribing to our channel, where we release new videos every single week where we spend the money so you don't have to. Make sure you guys smash that like button, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.